Today we are going to talk about Imperial Japan. It's going to include the Meiji Restoration, Imperialism, and the build-up to World War II. First, we need to talk about the Tokugawa Shogunate. Now, the Tokugawa family ruled Japan from 1603 until 1868. It is also known as the Edo period. Sometimes you'll see in parentheses Tokyo next to Edo because Edo was the previous name of modern-day city Tokyo. In 1635, foreign trade was limited to China, Korea, and the Netherlands only, and they could only trade at the city of Nagasaki for only a few times per year. It was very heavily regulated by the government. These were the only three countries they would consider trading with. Now, the emperor at the time, Mikado, ruled in name only. The actual power was still being held by the shogun of the time. The Sakuga edict of 1635. It was a decree by Japan to keep foreigners away. As you saw in the previous slide, trade was being severely limited at this time, and it was Japan's desired seclusion from foreign influence, basically meaning they were isolating themselves from other countries. They didn't want any other country to influence how their country was run, and they thought the best way to do that was to not trade with anyone. Now, the government strictly enforced this policy with rules and regulations. A little review of Japanese feudalism. You have the emperor at top, which I don't even have on this pyramid since he's so irrelevant at this point. You have your leader, the shogun, the daimyo, which are your wealthy landowners, your samurai, and then the peasants and merchants are all below. Now, the samurai lived by bushido, which was the way of the warrior, also known as chivalry. Ronin were those samurai without masters, meaning they did not work for a specific daimyo or shogun. Ninja, a warrior trained to use unorthodox, meaning unusual, fighting methods, like assassination, espionage, which is spying, and martial arts. Japanese culture and economy. Now, we talked a little bit about Japanese religion, and basically, at this point, it's a mixture of native Shintoism, we talked about Shinto a little bit, living spirits in all things is the basic belief with Shinto, and Chinese Confucianism, based on the teachings of Confucius, or his birth name, Kongzi. And remember, Confucianism, it's debated whether or not it's actually a religion, but the way to think of it is as a code of how you should act, and basically, it teaches respect, especially of your elders. Now, during the economy during this period, there was growing internal trade during the Edo period. Remember, they didn't want to trade with anyone else. And merchants actually began to surpass the samurai in wealth. Remember, merchants were one of the very bottom of the pyramid, actually below your peasants, which were your farmers. Because of the way they were doing trade, they were slowly being able to rise in station because of how much money they were making. The problem was they had very rigid social stratification, meaning it was very hard to increase your position, especially if we're talking about respect in the community, positions of power, more wealth. It was very difficult to do that. Now, these limits were being tested by the end of the Tokugawa Shogunate, specifically because of this merchant class. End of Japanese isolationism. U.S. Commodore Matthew Perry, who was a very famous Navy man, from 1794 to 1858. Now, he started something called gunboat diplomacy. By the name, I'm hoping you're assuming a little bit of what that means. In 1853, he basically showed up to Japan in a very large gunship, showing off U.S. naval power. And that was their way of negotiating trade by showing the power of the U.S. military might. Now, in 1854, they did negotiate a trade treaty with the United States, and very soon after, Great Britain, Holland, which were the Netherlands, and Russia soon gained similar trading rights. Townsend Harris, 1804 to 1878. He was the United States Consul General to Japan. In 1858, he helped negotiate a commercial treaty between U.S. and Japan. European powers soon gained similar rights in Japan. So basically, the whole idea of this slide is that Commodore Matthew Perry opened Japan up to trade with the United States. Townsend Harris helped keep the trade open, and because of these two gentlemen, the rest of the world was able to follow in our footsteps, and Japan was no longer isolated from the rest of the world, but trading with it now. Now, this is the Japanese reaction to the new trade rules. The pros, the good things with it, was something known as Dutch learning, basically meaning Western knowledge, became very popular among many doctors, scholars, and scientists. Japanese entrepreneurs, merchants, and budding industrialists started to profit from increased trade. Some of the negatives: Western knowledge went against many traditional Japanese beliefs, which caused a lot of friction. And traditional holders of prestige and power, think land, money, like daimyos and samurai, did not tend to profit from increased trade, which means they were less likely to agree to it. Now, it did lead to some resentment towards the United States and foreigners in general. There were many anti-foreign uprisings between 1863 and 1864, and Japanese ports were soon filled with foreign ships. The Meiji Restoration. Now, the shogun was forced to relinquish power, and power was now officially in the hands of Emperor Mishuto. Now, his reign was called the Meiji. Japanese westernization soon occurred, and the government quickly went to work to crafting a new constitution. So at this point, the shogun no longer mattered. Power is back in the hands of the emperor. Some governmental reforms, something known as the Diet, Japan's bicameral legislature. Bicameral is what we have here, where we have the House of Representatives and the Senate. Basically means your legislative branch has two parts to it. They first convened in 1889. The Meiji Imperial Constitution was adopted officially on 1890 and was followed until the end of World War II. Some economic reforms. With the change of everything that's been going on with opening up trade, with the power back in the hands of the emperor, it ended the idea of feudalism. They adopted a new currency known as the yen. You can see a picture of it here, and it was adopted in 1872. There is now encouragement of foreign trade, expansion and encouragement of industrialization. Think big factories and production. You also have your growth of your factories. There was the first large factories were there to manufacture textiles, fabric. Now, the first textile factory workers were actually girls and women. And there's also a number of land reforms going on at this time as well. Some military reforms. Now, before the Meiji era, armies were run by local daimyo and thus not subservient to a central government. Remember how we said that sometimes the samurai would war with each other because they had specific allegiances to the different daimyo or the shogun? Now, during the Meiji era, modern army and navy established, which were loyal to the Japanese government. So now you have an actual military that belongs to Japan, not to local leaders. They used Prussia, which is now modern-day Germany, as a primary model for how to structure their military. There was also the firm belief that if Japan was to be taken seriously by Western powers, then they needed a strong military. They also enacted something called conscription in 1873. Basically, conscription means that all men have to serve for 3 years in the military after turning 21. It's a type of legal draft. We have something similar in the United States. They had a number of social forms as well. Now, they had universal compulsory elementary education. What that means is that all children had to have an elementary level education at least. They also established several universities. You can actually see a picture of Tokyo University here, and a westernization of many laws, moving away from some traditional beliefs and laws. Now, imperialism is basically the idea of expanding your governmental power and boundaries beyond your country. Imperialism was very, very popular at this time. Many of the great powers in the world were invested in imperialism, including the United States. Now, with all of the changes that Japan was undergoing, they felt the need to try imperialism themselves. Here are the reasons why. 1, they had a lack of fertile land for agriculture, meaning they did not have enough land that was good for growing food on their island. They needed more places to grow food. They also needed markets for finished products. Market meaning some place to sell it. So they needed a place to sell their finished products, their finished goods. They also needed raw materials for industry. So they needed to be able to get materials in their basic form to use to make new goods from it. They also had a population boom. Their population was growing. They had more and more people, and they were running out of space. It was also a response to Western imperialism, because when you see other countries taking up land near you, it could make you nervous and want to build up your own country as well. The Meiji Japan at war. First, Sino-Japanese War from 1894 until 1895, and they basically just gained several pieces of territory here. It was against China. The Russo-Japanese War from 1904 to 1905, there was the destruction of the Russian fleet, and Japan was now finally respected as a world power. They also annexed Korea in 1910, meaning they took it as part of their own. They said, we now are in charge of Korea. Now, World War I, they joined the Allies, meaning they were on the United States, Great Britain, France type team. They received Germany's mandates over Asian islands and its leases in the Shantung Peninsula. Basically, what that means is that when Germany lost World War I, their possessions in the Pacific Ocean near Japan were given to Japan for basically helping defeat Germany. Now, their position changed on who they were allied with come World War II. Now, in 1940, Japan joined the Axis powers with Germany and Italy, meaning they were now opposed to Great Britain and France. At this time, the United States was claiming to be neutral. Now, there was this idea of Asia for Asians philosophy, basically meaning that you were going to liberate Asia from Western imperialism, meaning kick all foreigners out of Asia. In reality, what they wanted to do was replace Western imperialism with Japanese imperialism. They wanted to kick out the foreigners so they could take over. Now, Japanese imperialism did end with World War II, and Japan's territory returned to older, more traditional island. Last thing we have to talk about today is Pearl Harbor. Now, it occurred on December 7th, 1941. The Japanese fighter planes attacked the naval base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. More than 2,000 Americans died. This was before Japan had declared war on the United States, so it was a surprise attack. December 8th, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, or FDR, and Congress declared war on Japan. A few days after that, Germany and Italy declared war on the United States, making us a full-fledged member of the Allied powers, joining World War II. Alright, and that is it. Make sure you submit your notes on Canvas.